Good morning, boys and girls. This is Miss Simone, and today I'm going to read for you Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCluskey. This little symbol right here, y'all can see it, it's a little blurry, there you go, is it means that it's a Caldecott winner. So it won an award for its drawings or illustrations. And again, he's another author illustrator. Pretty cool. If you open the book, you can see the progression of a little duckling emerging from his egg. Pretty cute. Okay, make way for ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There was sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. See that? The next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. So obviously we've got a duck here made out of perhaps fiberglass. So he's not real, but the ducks thought he was. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out onto the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. "But—" "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. "You'll get run over." And when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies. With all of those horrid little things rushing around, we'll have to look somewhere else." So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. This is the square down here. Now these are real places in Boston too. So if you ever get to Boston or if you've already been there, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks just like the right place to hatch ducklings." So it looks like they're going to go here. So they chose a cozy spot among the brush near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until new ones grew in. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called on Michael every day. Called on means like they visited him every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs and keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch or to count the eggs just to make sure that they were all there. You can see he's kind of cleaning himself over here, Mr. Mallard. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, and then Lack, then Mack and Knack and Oack and Pack and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. Imagine so. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So he set off. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. She taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Oack, Pack, and Quack fell into line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way to the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they waded ashore and waddled until they came to the highway. I hope they're careful. Mrs. Mallard stepped out into the crossroad. Honk, honk, went the horns of the speeding cars. Quack, went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Oack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. Cute. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. You guys remember what these are? So tweet, honk, quack, quack, quack. Those are all examples of onomatopoeia. Hopefully you remembered that and said it as I was or before me. So Michael, he planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way the policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. So he's making way for her to get where she needs to go. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down to Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "A family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned on or into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Oack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. Here they are. Cute. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well, now, isn't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud that she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was a police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. This last one is always trying to catch up. Right on and into the public garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for him, just as he had promised. So here he is. See, he's always trying to catch up, that poor little guy at the end. I guess he's quack. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long, they followed the swan boats and ate peanuts. When the night falls, they swim to their little island and they go to sleep. The end. So that is Make Way for Ducklings. And I hope that you enjoyed this story and then also seeing the pictures of the ducklings at the pond. Have a wonderful day of learning, guys. Bye.